My brother-in-law called my cooking inedible at Thanksgiving dinner, so I made sure he'd never forget the taste of humble pie. Xavier had been ruining family gatherings for 2 years, ever since he married my sister Delaney, but this time was different. He stood up mid-meal, grabbed his napkin, and announced that my grandmother's stuffing recipe tasted like wet cardboard mixed with disappointment. The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle Pete stopped carving the turkey. Cousin Miranda nearly choked on her wine. Mom's face went white as she stared at the table she'd spent 3 days preparing. Delaney looked mortified, whispering apologies that Xavier waved away like annoying flies. "I'm just being honest," he said, pulling out his phone. "This is why restaurants exist. I'm ordering something edible." That's when I saw it in Delaney's eyes. The same defeated look she'd worn for months. Xavier had been systematically destroying her confidence, and now he was humiliating our entire family. Something cold and calculating settled in my chest. "You're absolutely right," I said, standing with my sweetest smile. "Let me make you something special, something you'll never forget." I disappeared into the kitchen, my mind racing. For months I'd been documenting Xavier's behavior. Screenshots of his social media where he mocked Delaney, recordings of phone calls where he bragged about marrying into our family for money, photos of him with other women. I'd been waiting for the right moment to expose him. This was it. I returned with a perfectly plated slice of pumpkin pie, complete with fresh whipped cream and a cinnamon stick garnish. Xavier's eyes lit up. He'd always been a sucker for dessert. "This looks amazing," he said, already reaching for his fork. "See? This is what real cooking looks like." He took a massive bite before anyone could react. The transformation was immediate and beautiful. His face contorted as the whipped cream, actually horseradish mixed with dish soap, hit his taste buds. The pumpkin filling, loaded with ghost pepper extract, followed seconds later. He began gagging, clawing at his throat, stumbling toward the kitchen sink. But that wasn't the real revenge. While he gasped and sputtered, I calmly walked to my purse and pulled out my tablet. With everyone's attention focused on Xavier's dramatic performance, I connected it to the smart TV and opened a folder labeled Xavier's True Colors. The first image appeared, bank statements showing gambling debts. Then came screenshots of dating profiles he'd kept active throughout his marriage, photos of him with other women at bars, hotels, restaurants, all time-stamped after his wedding. And finally, audio recordings of him laughing with his buddies about how he'd trapped that naive bitch and her loaded family. The room erupted. Delaney gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Uncle Pete started swearing. Mom threw her napkin at the screen. Cousin Miranda began taking photos, muttering about divorce lawyers. Xavier finally stopped retching and turned around, his face red and streaked with tears. When he saw the evidence displayed for everyone to see, all color drained from his cheeks. "Where did you get? How did you? That's private," he stammered. "Privacy?" I laughed. "Like the privacy you gave my sister when you posted about her on Reddit? When you shared intimate photos with your poker buddies? When you took out credit cards in her name?" That's when Xavier snapped. He lunged across the room, hands reaching for my throat. Uncle Pete intercepted him. But in the struggle, Xavier's flailing arm caught the edge of the china cabinet. 23 pieces of Mom's heirloom dishes crashed to the floor. And that's when I heard it. A sound that made my blood freeze. The smoke alarm. In my focus on revenge, I'd forgotten about the special ingredient I'd added to the kitchen timer. The one connected to the gas valve I'd quietly adjusted while preparing Xavier's dessert. The plan had been simple. A small leak. Just enough to clear the house and really drive home the point. But looking at the orange glow now flickering under the kitchen door, I realized I'd miscalculated. The smoke wasn't just smoke. The kitchen was on fire. "Everyone out!" I screamed, abandoning my tablet on the coffee table. The smart TV continued cycling through Xavier's sins as chaos erupted around us. Delaney was closest to the front door, but she stood frozen, staring at the screen showing her husband with another woman. "Move!" I shoved her toward the exit as Uncle Pete grabbed Mom's arm. Xavier, still coughing from the horseradish, stumbled past us. "What did you do?" he wheezed. I didn't answer. I was too busy calculating how badly I'd screwed up. The gas leak hadn't been supposed to ignite. I'd adjusted the valve just enough to create a detectable odor, forcing everyone to evacuate and giving Xavier time to think about what he'd lost. But the pilot light on the old stove must have caught it. We spilled onto the front lawn as neighbors began emerging from their houses. Someone was already calling 911. The fire department would arrive soon, along with investigators who would want to know how exactly a Thanksgiving dinner had turned into a potential house fire. "Call the fire department!" Mom was screaming at Uncle Pete, who was frantically dialing on his phone. I watched flames lick at the kitchen window, knowing that in about 10 minutes, firefighters would be poking through the debris. They'd find the tampered gas valve, they'd run tests on the timer I'd modified, and they'd start asking very pointed questions about why someone had been messing with potentially deadly appliances during a family dinner. "This is your fault," Xavier said, pointing at me with a shaking finger. His face was still flushed from the ghost pepper, snot streaming from his nose. "You poisoned me, and now you've burned down the house." "I didn't poison you," I snapped. "It was horseradish and dish soap. You'll live." But the house fire? That was a different story. Delaney was crying, clutching her phone. The screen showed missed calls from divorce lawyers she'd apparently contacted weeks ago. So she'd been planning to leave him anyway. That made me feel slightly better about destroying her Thanksgiving. "How bad is it?" Mom asked, watching flames spread from the kitchen to the dining room. Her grandmother's antique table was probably already ashed. I didn't answer because I was watching a much bigger problem unfold. Xavier had found his phone and was recording everything. The burning house, my family's shocked faces, and most importantly, me standing too calm for someone whose accident had just destroyed a house. "You planned this," he said, still recording. You tried to kill me with that pie, and when that didn't work, you burned down the house. That's insane, I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. The truth was, I had planned part of it. The evidence folder, the poisoned pie, even the gas leak, but not the fire. Never the fire. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Uncle Pete grabbed my arm. What really happened in there? I opened my mouth to lie, but Cousin Miranda was staring at me with wide eyes. I saw you messing with something behind the stove, she said quietly. Before you brought out the pie, I thought you were just getting a pot. My stomach dropped. The fire trucks rounded the corner, lights blazing. Behind them came police cars and an ambulance. This was about to become a crime scene, and I was about to become suspect number 1. You need to tell them it was an accident, Mom said, gripping my shoulders. Whatever you did, whatever happened, it was an accident. But Xavier was still recording, and his expression had shifted from pain to calculation. He'd figured out that this disaster might actually work in his favor. A crazy sister-in-law who tried to poison him and burn down the house would make him look like the victim in divorce proceedings. The first firefighter jogged over. Is everyone accounted for? Yes, Uncle Pete said, but we need to check my nephew. He ate something that made him sick right before the fire started. Xavier immediately clutched his throat dramatically. She poisoned me, he gasped, pointing at me. And I think she started the fire on purpose. The firefighter looked between us, then radioed for the paramedics. I watched them load Xavier into the ambulance, still filming himself talking about attempted murder. Delaney climbed in beside him, but she kept looking back at me with an expression I couldn't read. Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions, a police officer said, approaching with a notebook. And that's when I realized the real problem wasn't the fire, or the poisoned pie, or even Xavier's accusations. The problem was that I documented everything. For months, I'd been collecting evidence of Xavier's crimes. But in the process, I'd created evidence of my own premeditation. Every screenshot, every recording, every photo was time-stamped and saved to the cloud. Digital breadcrumbs that would lead investigators straight to the truth. I'd been planning revenge for months. Can we do this at the station? I asked. I think I need a lawyer. The officer nodded, but his expression had already shifted. I wasn't a witness anymore. I was a suspect. 3 hours later, I sat in an interrogation room across from Detective Ramirez, a tired-looking woman who'd clearly been called in from home. She'd spread out printouts of my evidence folder across the metal table. Impressive collection, she said, tapping the stack of papers. Screenshots going back 8 months. Audio recordings from multiple dates. Even GPS data showing where you followed him to document his affairs. I stared at the evidence of my own obsession spread out like a roadmap to prison. The thing is, Detective Ramirez continued, this shows clear premeditation. You weren't just collecting evidence for your sister's divorce. You were building a case for revenge. I wanted to expose him, I said. Not hurt him. But you did hurt him. The horseradish and dish soap caused chemical burns in his mouth and throat. And then there's the gas leak. She pulled out a photograph of the kitchen timer, blackened but still recognizable. Fire investigator found this connected to a modified gas valve. Someone with knowledge of appliance repair deliberately created a dangerous situation. My dad had been a plumber. I'd helped him on jobs since I was 12. Of course, I knew how to adjust a gas valve. I just wanted to clear the house, I said. I never meant for it to catch fire. But you did mean to create a gas leak in a house full of people. I couldn't deny it. The evidence was all there in my own meticulous documentation. Your brother-in-law is claiming attempted murder, Detective Ramirez said. The district attorney is considering charges of aggravated assault, arson, and reckless endangerment. I thought about Xavier in the hospital, probably already calling reporters. He'd turned this into a media circus, painting himself as the victim of a deranged woman who tried to kill him for insulting her cooking. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent months collecting evidence to destroy Xavier's credibility, only to create evidence that destroyed my own. I want to make a deal, I said. Detective Ramirez raised an eyebrow. What kind of deal? I leaned forward. I'll plead guilty to reckless endangerment if you arrest Xavier for fraud, identity theft, and adultery. I can prove all of it. Adultery isn't a crime in this state, she said. And the other charges. We'd need your sister to press charges. She will, I said, hoping it was true, once she sees everything I collected. But even as I said it, I wondered if Delaney would forgive me for burning down Mom's house to expose her husband's crimes. Some victories cost more than they're worth. Detective Ramirez gathered up the papers. We'll be in touch. Try not to poison anyone else while you're waiting. She left me alone in the room with my reflection in the one-way mirror. I looked tired and older than my 28 years. This wasn't how I'd imagined revenge would feel. My phone buzzed with a text from Delaney. Xavier's asking for $1 million to drop the charges. Says he'll settle for that and a public apology. Of course he was. Xavier had turned this into his retirement plan. I texted back, don't pay him anything. I'm not apologizing for exposing the truth. But sitting in that interrogation room, I wondered if the truth had been worth it. Mom's house was gone. I was facing felony charges. And Xavier was going to walk away richer and more vindicated than ever. The door opened and Detective Ramirez returned with a man in an expensive suit. This is District Attorney Walsh, she said. He wants to discuss your case. Walsh sat down across from me, spreading out a different set of papers. Ms. Coleman, I've reviewed the evidence you collected on Xavier Hendricks. It's quite thorough. I blinked, surprised by his tone. I'd expected another lecture about attempted murder. The thing is, Walsh continued, we've been investigating Xavier for months. Insurance fraud specifically. He's filed 13 claims in the past 3 years, all for suspicious accidents. He showed me photographs of Xavier's previous homes and vehicles, all damaged in increasingly implausible ways. Your documentation of his spending habits and gambling debts helps establish motive, Walsh said. We think he's been staging accidents to collect insurance money. I stared at the photographs. You're saying he's done this before? We think so. And your house fire? Well, it fits the pattern. Xavier Hendricks has a history of being present when insured property is mysteriously destroyed. The room tilted. You think Xavier started the fire? We think he saw an opportunity, Detective Ramirez said. You created a gas leak, but security footage from a neighbor's house shows Xavier going back into the kitchen before the fire started. He was in there alone for almost 2 minutes. They showed me the grainy footage on a tablet. There was Xavier, stumbling toward the kitchen after the pie incident. But instead of going to the sink like we all thought, he'd gone deeper into the kitchen, out of view. What was he doing back there? I asked. We think he lit the gas, Walsh said. Turned your prank into a real fire so he could collect insurance money and frame you for attempted murder. 2 birds, 1 stone. I thought about Xavier's calculating expression as he filmed the burning house. His dramatic performance for the paramedics. The $1 million settlement demand. He's been planning this, I said. Probably since he married your sister, Detective Ramirez agreed. Access to your family's assets, insurance policies, property. Xavier's specialty is marrying into money, then finding ways to extract it. Walsh slid a plea agreement across the table. We'll drop all charges against you in exchange for your testimony against Xavier. Your evidence folder becomes part of our case. I picked up the pen but hesitated. What about my sister? She's already filed for divorce, Detective Ramirez said. Turns out she's been collecting her own evidence. Bank statements, credit reports, medical records from previous wives. Previous wives, plural. How many women has he done this to? I asked. At least 4 that we know of, Walsh said. Your sister reached out to them after the fire. They're all willing to testify. I signed the plea agreement, feeling lighter than I had in months. Xavier had underestimated both of us. He'd thought Delaney was naive and I was reckless. He'd been wrong on both counts. 6 months later, I sat in a courtroom watching Xavier get sentenced to 15 years for insurance fraud, identity theft, and attempted murder. The judge had reviewed all the evidence. His pattern of targeting vulnerable women, the staged accidents, the systematic financial abuse. Mr. Hendricks, the judge said, you've made a career of exploiting trust and manufacturing tragedy for profit. The court finds your actions particularly heinous because of the psychological damage inflicted on your victims. Xavier's lawyer had tried to paint me as the real criminal, a vengeful woman who'd tried to murder her brother-in-law over a dinner insult. But the evidence told a different story. Xavier's fingerprints on the gas valve, adjusted after my initial tampering, security footage showing him alone in the kitchen, bank records revealing he'd increased the house insurance just 2 months earlier. Delaney testified about the years of emotional abuse, the stolen money, the other women. She'd become a different person on the witness stand, strong, articulate, angry in all the right ways. He told me I was lucky he married me, she said, that no one else would want damaged goods. But I wasn't damaged when I met him. He made me that way. The 4 previous wives testified too. A pattern emerged of Xavier selecting emotionally vulnerable women, isolating them from family and friends, then systematically destroying their self-worth while stealing their assets. When he was done with them, he'd stage an accident and disappear with the insurance money. I'd been his insurance policy with our family, literally. If his marriage to Delaney didn't work out, he could always claim I'd tried to kill him and sue for damages. After the sentencing, Delaney and I stood outside the courthouse together. The past year had aged us both, but in different ways. She looked stronger. I looked exhausted. Thank you, she said, for collecting all that evidence, for being willing to burn everything down to save me. I almost did burn everything down, I said. I'm sorry about Mom's house. Mom's fine. Insurance covered most of it, and she's happier in her new apartment. Says it's easier to clean. We walked to our cars in comfortable silence. Delaney had moved back home during the trial, sleeping in her old bedroom while she figured out her next steps. I'd been crashing on friends' couches, unable to face living alone after everything that had happened. Want to grab dinner? She asked. I found this great Thai place that definitely doesn't serve wet cardboard mixed with disappointment. I laughed. The first real laugh I'd had in months. As long as you're not cooking, deal. But next Thanksgiving, you're banned from the kitchen. I'm ordering from a restaurant. Xavier would approve, I said. Xavier can rot in prison, Delaney replied cheerfully. We drove to the Thai place and ordered enough food for 4 people. Delaney told me about her new job at a women's shelter, helping other victims of financial abuse. I told her about my plans to finish my degree in criminal justice, maybe work for the district attorney's office. We make a good team, she said, stealing pad thai from my plate. Maybe we should go into business together. Sisters Investigative Services. Our first case could be finding out why Thai food tastes so much better than anything I've ever cooked, I said. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, Delaney replied. But sitting there with my sister, sharing a meal without fear or manipulation or hidden agendas, I realized some mysteries were worth solving, like how to rebuild trust after betrayal, how to find strength after being broken, how to create something good from the ashes of something terrible. Xavier had tried to destroy us both, but we'd survived. More than survived. We'd won. The next morning, I woke up in my sister's old bedroom to the smell of coffee and actual edible breakfast. Delaney was in the kitchen, humming while she made pancakes that didn't taste like cardboard. Sleep well? She asked, sliding a plate toward me. Better than I have in months, I said, cutting into the pancakes. They were perfect. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Ramirez. Xavier's cellmate wants to know if you have any more of that pie recipe. Says he's heard great things about your cooking. I showed Delaney the text. She snorted coffee through her nose. Should we send the recipe to prison? She asked. Definitely, I said. But maybe we should tone down the ghost pepper extract. We don't want to cause a riot. We spent the morning writing out Gran's actual pumpkin pie recipe, the one that had been in our family for 3 generations. The one Xavier had never bothered to taste because he'd been too busy insulting everything we offered him. At the bottom, Delaney added a note, best served with a side of justice and a tall glass of karma. I added my own postscript. Warning, may cause chronic honesty and sudden urges to treat people with respect. We mailed it to the prison that afternoon, along with a photo of us smiling over coffee and actually edible food. 6 months later, Xavier's cellmate sent us a thank you card. The pie had been a hit in the prison kitchen. Xavier apparently hadn't been invited to the tasting. Some people never learn to appreciate good cooking, but then again, some people never learn to appreciate anything good at all. Delaney and I did start that investigative business. Sisters Investigative Services specialized in financial crimes and domestic abuse cases. We helped dozens of women escape situations like Delaney's, collecting evidence of fraud and manipulation that their abusers thought they'd hidden forever. Our first office was above a bakery that made the most incredible pumpkin pie. We'd often treat our clients to a slice while we explained their legal options. Most of them had never tasted anything so sweet after years of bitterness. I kept Xavier's mugshot on my desk as a reminder of what happened when people underestimated women who'd been pushed too far. Delaney preferred the photo from his sentencing, where he was finally speechless. Every Thanksgiving, we ordered from that Thai restaurant Xavier had mentioned, the one that supposedly existed to save people from family cooking. But we'd learned that the best meals weren't about the food at all. They were about sitting at a table where you felt safe, valued, and genuinely loved. No seasoning in the world could improve the taste of that. And every year on Thanksgiving night, we'd raise our glasses of wine and toast the same thing. To Xavier, Delaney would say with a grin, for teaching us that the best revenge is a life well lived, I'd finish. Then we'd dig into our pad thai and be grateful for everything we'd gained by losing everything we thought we wanted, including the ability to finally tell the difference between real love and manipulation seasoned with pretty words. Xavier had called my cooking inedible, but he'd never tasted what our family was really made of, loyalty, strength, and the absolute refusal to let anyone poison what we'd built together. That recipe, it turned out, was worth more than all his insurance scams combined. And unlike his schemes, it had a happy ending that would last forever. The last I heard, Xavier was learning to cook for himself in the prison kitchen. Apparently, his cellmates weren't impressed with his table manners or his tendency to complain about everything he was served. Funny how that worked out. Some people spend their whole lives trying to acquire a taste for humble pie. Others get force-fed it until they finally swallow their pride. Xavier got both, and I got my sister back, along with the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the best way to serve justice is on a silver platter with a side of poetic irony. Just like Gran always said, the secret ingredient in any good recipe is love. But she never mentioned that sometimes. That love requires burning down everything toxic to make room for something better. Lucky for us, we'd learned to cook with fire, and Xavier had learned far too late that he should never insult the chef.